Okay, so my father is Bengali, my mother is Malayali, and I'm 22 now. Uh, so I've sort of been brought up in this in a family that doesn't really have a sense of community or tradition and customs or any reservations. So we're a pretty open family and quite forward thinking. So including my grandparents on both sides. So yeah, I've had a really I've had a sort of childhood where I've been allowed to make my own decisions and choose what I believe in. No ideas were really imposed on me or ways of thought. So I have had a very sort of um, culturally and ideologically independent upbringing and like an open upbringing where I just like decide been able to find who I am as a person on my own. So I'm here because I was told that what y'all do is sort of open talk about issues that are considered taboo or not really spoken about in society, and eating disorders and depression happen to be one of them. And I, having experienced both, think that they really should be spoken about in society because when I was undergoing them or when I was going through it, and still am, I really did need someone to listen to or someone to talk to. And if and I feel like if I can do this and if I can talk about it, and I definitely think could help someone who is suffering with an issue like depression or eating disorders, because I know if I were able to listen to someone or talk to someone when I was going through it, it would have helped me. So if I can get if some good can come out of the suffering that I've gone through, then I'm more than happy to, you know, make that happen. The first disorder that I fell into was bulimia, which is when you regurgitate the food that you've eaten after eating it in order to prevent your body or stop your body from digesting it and absorbing the fats or the calories or any of that or the energy. So again, in order to rapidly lose weight. So that I fell into that when I was in the 10th grade, where I came home one day and had a heavy meal, and I had always been so up until that point I had always had issues with my body image or and my weight and my build, and I felt like I was slightly bigger built and I didn't know. And I never decided to take any action like in terms of exercise or any weight loss treatments or seeing a nutritionist. I just on a whim had ate this meal at home when no one was at home and thought that I've heard about it and let's just see what it's like, because I anyway felt pretty full. So I went to the bathroom and I stuck my fingers down my throat and I brought up all that I had eaten. I felt good and relieved, and I was like, okay, that wasn't so bad, but it was very tiring, and it was just a one-time thing. And I never thought more of, like, I didn't think about it anymore. I didn't think it would go anywhere, but lo and behold, it did turn into a really crippling and long, taxing disorder that lasted over 5 years after. So, giving yourself that option of being able to throw up what you've eaten, you start being more open to eating anything. So, calorie heavy foods or fatty foods or junk food. And when you do eat a lot more of that, your body eventually starts to lose the taste for that, and you like automatically, just intrinsically, you start veering away from from these binge phases. I call binge phases, where you really go all out and just eat the stuff that you're not like that's really not good for you, and you start to eat healthier, or you start to eat like smaller portions and just smaller portions basically. Now those smaller portions, when you start doing that, you feel the need to throw up less, and that is all sort of what stemmed the idea of let's starve ourselves, let's starve myself. So that became anorexia, which is the process of starving yourself and not consuming food until your body just burns the fat that you have stored. Now, the thing with anorexia is that it is a lot harder to hide, even though you would think it's easier, because how do you starve yourself when everyone's watching you eat? So that's when the sort of manipulation comes in, where you become this like super spy. Like, I mean, I was like a stealthy ninja. Like, I was always finding these sort of loopholes and ways to like disguise my plate and thinking into other people thinking that I've eaten when I really haven't. And a dog really helps at that time. So we had a dog. At the end of it, I would have consumed nothing, maybe like a slice of cucumber, because cucumbers are 90% water, so I didn't really mind that. A couple of slices of cucumber, and I would have basically fooled everyone into thinking that I've had a full meal for years on end. So I did that. So anorexia, again, like depression, is it affects your brain, it affects your judgment, it affects the cognitive part of your brain. So when I decided to be anorexic, it was with the effort to lose weight and change my body image, change how my body looked. So the thing with anorexia is initially it feels great. Like you start, it sort of becomes this addiction. It sort of becomes this like cutting. Like cutting is you start getting addicted to the pain and the effect of it. When you see the blood, it sort of gives you that rush, and it sort of gives you that calmness. Like cigarettes, like anything like that, anorexia does the same thing because it has a physical effect on you. So when you're not eating for so long, you start gaining, I mean, your stomach starts hurting and you start getting these like cramps, and these start, and that's pain, and it feels good, and you start getting like attached to it. And I would love that pain. I was like wait for it, and I used to like get, as long as I was feeling the pain, I was like, okay, I'm on the right track. So you don't eat. And if I'm not feeling the pain, then it's like, why I haven't, okay, I'm waiting for it, like I'm waiting for the pain, like because I ate, like I drank water, or it was something like that. When I wasn't in front of when I wasn't experiencing the pain and I wasn't experiencing the constant effects of it, that was the only time I wasn't experiencing those effects was when I was looking at the results, which was when I was looking in front of a mirror. But anorexia, just like bulimia, can't be sustained for long. And so the thing with anorexia and bulimia and all these eating disorders is that they almost always come in pairs. They're cyclic. They're cyclical disorders. So you have these phases of binge, which induces bulimia, and then once you sort of your body doesn't need the binge anymore and it's kind of satisfied itself and the craving stops, then you find yourself easier, and you find it easier to enter the world of anorexia, and then you keep that up for as long as you can until your body starts craving food again, and then you start binging, and then you get back into bulimia. So this was a cycle of my eating disorder that I sort of suffered in secret for about 2 years before I was like caught or found out. So though it started in the 10th, I spent that summer like, actually getting the weight off. And so I came back to school in, when classes commenced and school reopened, and everyone was just like, oh my gosh, you've lost so much weight. Oh my God, you look great. And my parents didn't see it as much because they would still see me every day. But then I realized how much weight I'd lost, and then it just kept getting worse and worse. So because I fed off the attention. So that was like motivation to keep your disorder going. Like, okay, you're doing good. Just in fact, like the more attention I got, the more severe my starvation or my throwing up, my regurgitation would get, because I would just feel that much more motivation to lose like even more weight. And I just got back from just classes in general, and my mom had come back early that day, and she thought she heard me, and she asked me about it. She said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." And she said, "Did you throw up?" And I said, "No, I'm fine." But she asked me in terms of, "Are you unwell? Are you okay?" And that was fine. We brushed it off and we didn't talk about it. So especially during my anorexia phases, I would generally pack the breakfast and take it on the bus and give it to whoever, all the boys who were hungry and wanted food on the bus in the morning. But during bulimic phases, I would eat the breakfast and then go up and throw up before I had to catch my school bus. So I did that, and because as usual, I was obviously late for the bus, like I always am. So I, in a hurry, just flushed once and I left, but it didn't all go away. So when my mom came later, she and like walked into my bathroom and she saw that she saw food in it, and that's when she was really concerned, and she asked me that night. She said, "Have you been throwing up?" And I mean, more than denial, it was almost, I guff out. I was just like, are you ridiculous? I'm not stupid. And I mean, it was blatant manipulative denial. Like, I just manipulated her into thinking she's the crazy one. And I convinced her that she was being over dramatic and paranoid. And unfortunately, there not enough time passed before she found it again. And this time I was at home, and this time when she asked me, she was so sure that I didn't. She didn't even give me a chance to start the manipulation game. And she just cried and said, "Deshna, just tell me I'm here for you. Don't hide it. Don't deny it." And then at that point I just said, "Okay, fine, yeah." Without crying, but without any emotion, I was just like, "Yes, this is what's happening, but don't worry, I'm fine. It's not a problem. It's just okay, I am." So when she found that out, she was devastated, and she said, "I can't. Please let me help you." And then it became the whole, "Will you please see a psychiatrist? Will you please see a therapist?" And the only reason I said yes, and I didn't even think about saying no at that point, because I was just looking at her and I saw the kind of pain she was in, and I just didn't understand why she was in that pain, but I knew she was in pain, so I said yes. So with no sort of motivation of my own, or no want of my own, did I go and see a therapist. And we're in this ward, which was like a general ward, I think. And so while I'm waiting for him, I'm a 16-year-old kid who's kind of just like, whatever, I don't know why I'm here. And I see this horde of policemen in the criminal police with the khaki uniforms walk with surrounding this one man who's chained from, like, his hands and legs. And I'm just like, why am I here? And then my mom goes, which ward is this? And then she asks the policeman in Kannada or whatever, and he says, oh, this is a psychiatry ward. He's being tested for criminal insanity. And then I was just like, am I really, is this the kind of help I need for something that I don't even think is a problem? So that actually induces a lot more denial, and it took a lot more therapy sessions to get me out of that shell of saying I'm fine and actually admit that I have a problem just because of the place I was in, which made me feel like I have when something makes you feel like you have a problem, you tend to fight against it, especially when you haven't experienced any symptoms of having a problem. Because in my head, in my experience, I just lost a lot of weight, I had gotten a lot of good attention, and there was nothing bad I was experiencing. Those symptoms come later, because when you start doing it for a long time, then you start losing the hair. Then my hair started falling, my skin became like, was horrible, it was dull, and and then you can't stay awake, and I was sleeping 16 hours a day, started missing class. So that all takes a toll on you later, and that's when you actually, and so the symptoms of my eating disorder is what induced my depression. And that is when I felt like I can't do this anymore, and you just sort of give up. And then it's that whole battle of depression, which is absolutely emotionally exhausting, and physically almost impossible, especially depending on your responsibilities and where you are at that point of time. So I was in school, and luckily I had that support system, but a lot of people don't. And that is what is so scary about depression, because it's something you can't do alone, and most often than not, people, because of circumstances, are dealing with it alone. So I remember there's these few instances I clearly remember, which was one when we were kids. There was this game that we used to play in Aditi. So I was running to the goal, and I remember, and I was a very fast runner always. I was just very fast. So it was hard to catch me. I remember him and all his gang of boys running behind me, going, "Catch the fat one! Catch the fatty!" And so it was really funny to think about it, but it stuck with me. And so I think from that day onwards, even though I was so small, we were in the third grade or something, I think maybe the second or third standard, I all automatically started associating myself with that name. Even without being conscious about it, it really sort of affected my confidence and in myself. So I automatically started thinking of myself as someone who should, kind of stay in the shadows. Like, I never really tried to and I was never attention seeking, or I never liked attention or liked being in spotlight or any of that. So the thing with with children who have self-esteem issues or image issues is that they tend to really gravitate and relate and sort of gain support from other children who have those same issues. So there are about two or three other girls in my class who were also on the fatter side or the chubbier side. So we were very young and very protected, and we didn't have to face. We had a very privileged upbringing where our problems were just limited to literally just those self-esteem issues. So what bonded me, the strength of our bonds were actually very different. So I had a very very good, very close and strong bond with one of the girls whose bond developed over humor. And the reason it was more about humor and less about the self-esteem and the being fat was because we were otherwise in front of other people, we were too scared to be as humorous or as funny and have as much fun with them. So when we were together, it was all about just that, just having fun and laughing about things that we wouldn't laugh about with other people. So it actually came out with humor because she was also a lot like me. We had the same sense of humor, and we had the same creativity, and we had really crazy imaginations. And so that was what my relation with her was more. My bond with her was more, over. The other girl who was also chubby, she was more sensitive, and it was all. So when you were with her, it was just mainly like, okay, we don't have anyone else, let's hold on to each other. So that was just more like a mutualistic support relation. Sometimes more so from her end because she would need it more. She was a very sensitive girl. We got along, you know, phenomenally. Was we the only time I was like myself, or I was as happy as I was, is when I was with her or with these two people. So that whole cast of fatty thing kind of made me feel like this outcast almost, where I wasn't as appealing as a person, as a friend to everyone else. That's how I felt. So I felt like I was not as. And it wasn't about popularity. It wasn't about. It was just about likability. It's just like, okay, no one is gonna like me, so I probably am not that much. So it was just like, yeah, no one wants to hang out with me. No one wants to joke with me. No one wants to. I was very young. I was a kid, but that kind of, it makes you sort of isolate yourself just because you're so scared that all that, in your head it's true. No one likes you. Even if it's not, you don't even give yourself that chance to be shot down because you're so scared and so intimidated and have such strong insecurities that you don't even put yourself out there, which is what translates to a lot of adults, and that's how a lot of people live their lives even till date. Thankfully, I don't. I am a lot more confident in who I am as a person now because I I'm aware and I identify my strong points and what I have to offer. So I know I have something to offer. So I'm not insecure about who I am. And then so that was where I know that I had like image issues and self esteem issues. But when I spoke to my psychiatrist about it, uh, uh, these are the issues these are the memories I brought up because I know that they're directly related to how I think of my body now. But then he asked me to go a little deeper, and then he asked, basically when I was 14, I was watching an episode of Oprah, and I saw on it she was interviewing someone who was describing her experience being molested as a child. And when I was watching it, I suddenly had this epiphany and was like, oh my gosh, this happened to me. And then sort of just as in like a like a wall, it hit me when and all these memories of how so we had this neighbor in our old house. We used to stay in Nandidal Road. So I used to go there often. I used to go to his house and play. His wife would invite me and they would give me something to eat, and then that was about it. They treated me like, like just and my parents knew that they trusted them because there's this elderly couple who could play with me when they were at work. And he used to start taking me outside the house. So his wife used to be inside cooking and stuff, they had like a perimeter compound. Like I mean, there was like a gap. There was a wall, and you could walk around the house. There was a boundary there. So he used to take me outside the house where she wasn't there and she couldn't see. And he used to walk around his house carrying me and used to put his hands in my pants. So he used to touch me. And I was about, I think 8 at the time, 7, maybe 7.5. I remember I had just turned 8 when I was already 8 when it ended, so I assuming it started when I was about 8, let's just say 8. So he used to touch me, and I knew it was, and I never really knew what it was or what he was doing. So I never really said anything to anyone or brought it up because I didn't know if it was something wrong or bad. I just knew it. No one else did that to me. And I never really said anything to anyone about it ever. And then this went on for a while. Until once when he was carrying me, it went on for about a good couple of months. And then once I remember when he was carrying me, this is what brought back the memory because this is when I knew something was wrong. Was when he was carrying me outside the house and his wife wasn't at home that day. She'd probably gone out to run errands or something. So he took me inside the house and he was touching me and he got a little aggressive and he dropped me. Like he lost his grip and I fell and I got scared and because he tried to grab me and I started running and I remember I ran around the house like around the perimeter and he chased me and I ran outside his gate and ran back to my house and didn't say anything to anyone because I was petrified and I was very very scared and I never told anyone or brought it up or I just made a resolution to myself that I will not go back there and I never ever gave it another thought and it was a memory that wasn't even that I didn't even know was in my subconscious until I was 14 and I saw that episode. And so 14 is when I actually remembered or understood that I was more than remember when I understood that I was molested. So I really don't I've never felt any direct impact or like even in terms of my intimacy with people today or I've never really felt anger uh, that active feeling of being violated. But he did say that the experiences like that often stem OCDs and image issues. And so I had both. So this OCD thing also I didn't realize had any relation to my eating disorder. So I never mentioned it. But then he uncovered all these things without me having to tell him about it. So the OCD which I had was basically this deathly fear of carpets and cloth. So if I saw a stain on a carpet, so in movie theaters, I had to enter the movie theater only after the lights went off. So if I can't really see the stains. But if I did, and in the intervals, I would just shut my eyes and wait till the lights go off again. Because if I see the stain, I just would break down, have this very strong emotional breakdown where I felt like I was just covered in dirt and overwhelmed with dirt and I could not handle it. And now I have absolutely no, I mean, they bother me, but I have no active paranoia related to carpets or, bus seats or train seats and stuff. So I'm able to walk on that, and that has really helped me control and minimize my urge towards bulimia and anorexia. So initially, when I had to, like I said, the first time I went was not because I wanted to go. But the thing with my first therapist was he was someone who I enjoyed talking to. The thing with my sessions, everyone says, and that's a good thing, that should have helped you. But I enjoyed talking to him during that 1 hour, 1.5 hour session. And then I would go back and go about the rest of the day feeling good about it or feeling nice that I had a nice exchange with someone about, what I'm going through. But that was as far as it went. And like the next morning and come Monday morning, it was back to the same pain. And I didn't feel like being able to talking about it on Saturday with him has really made my suffering on Monday any like easier to bear or any easier to deal with. The more therapists I saw, the less I wanted to see them, despite how comforting and nice or understanding they were. After a point, because from the get-go, I never wanted to see one. I never wanted to go to a therapist or psychiatrist. So it just kept getting, but initially I did it for my mom and for my family, for my dad. So they were like, so they felt, as long as I was going to therapist, I knew that they were a lot more sort of okay. They were, because they felt like, okay, we're doing our part, we are taking care of, we aren't capable of helping her, but we're getting her the help she needs, so she's in good hands, she will be okay, so that's how parents think, that's how they feel. So I knew that it was giving them a lot of strength and a lot of closure, so I did it mainly for them. So after a while I started dreading them, I started hating it. And I even took a semester off in college after my first year because of my depression. I was so depressed, I couldn't get myself to get out of bed and go to class. So at that point, is when I said, okay, my mom was just like, forget it, work on yourself, fix yourself. We'll don't think about college right now. So that time was easier because I had more time, and I was like, okay, fine, let's go to therapist. I would come back, and she would generally make a day out of it. My parents would like to do this. They'd make a day out of it. So they take me in the morning, and then they take me out for lunch, and then they take we go for a movie maybe in the evening. So it became like a fun day. So they'd always very cleverly associate good times and family activities with this sort of ominous therapy session. But the thing was, I was open for the most part that I was depressed, and that's why, because when I had to rejoin college, I was in another class. I was with new kids. So I did tell them that, and everyone knew that I had left because I was depressed. But I never got into really talking about it, just because I didn't have the energy to. And the problem was, though I was open about it, I started rebelling against the system of therapy and getting better. And I just, at one point, the switch flipped, and I was just like, I don't really care about getting better. I really don't care, because none of this is helping me. Therapy doesn't help me. Therapists don't help me. I don't care. I'm depressed. Screw it. I'm just gonna, have as much fun as I can in the moment, which then became drugs, alcohol, and that life. So I did get into, let's not the best of company, and then I started this phase of making this momentary happiness, this living in the moment. As long as I'm high, or I'm not thinking about it, I'm fine. And that's the only way I didn't want to go home anymore. So I started spending like 4 to 5 nights out every week. I would only go home on the weekends just to like change, like get new clothes and get money, and that's it. And my parents aren't stupid at all. So even my mom was like, forget it. Why should we support this sort of lifestyle? But it's like being any, when you enter that sort of lifestyle, it's very easy to keep it up, because there are always people who are there to fuel it. If you can always find them. So I found the people who were willing to fuel it, and they fueled my lifestyle, and all we did was drink and do drugs, and that was it. And I stopped trying to get better, and I stopped going for therapy, and I just stopped being a part of the recovery system. And then I burnt out, because even that, you really can't keep up for that long. And thankfully, because it did pull me out of it, but my grandfather fell sick, and my grandfather is was an extremely big part of my life. It was like a rope that caught me and just pulled me right out of that world, and brought me back to life, to the life I should be living. So, and yes, then he passed in April of last year, and that's when I started. I was surrounded by the right people and good influences again, and I got better, and I got really, I became a lot more focused on getting better,